Hey, all right. Back to some more court cases. This one is one of my favorite cases, and it's for the most part got a happy ending. It doesn't have a complete happy outcome, but in part it does. It would have been better if it had completely good, but what do you do? So, this case comes out of the state of Louisiana, particularly New Orleans. And it's an interesting case because it deals with complexities of race and it deals with, the difficulty in proving specifically something in the 1840s without any kind of DNA evidence or anything like that, or even blood typing or anything. So it's a pretty difficult sort of concept to try to play through the courts, and so it's kind of a neat case, I think. Um, anyway, so down in New Orleans in 1843, an enslaved young lady named Sally Miller is working at a cafe. She is placed in charge of taking orders and bringing food out to people, basically serving people. And her owner, Mr. Belmonti, works in the back as the cook. Now, New Orleans, Louisiana as a whole is a lot more fuzzy than the rest of the South. The rest of the South, there's a pretty clear, I guess, dichotomy most of the time for telling if someone is African American and not. You do have people that do have African ancestry but appear to be white and sort of pass as white. In New Orleans, that's more common than the rest of the South. And, a really good picture that I like to bring up is that picture down there in the corner. Those two children are enslaved children in New Orleans. And, the young man there is definitely African American. He has African ancestry, but the young lady there appears to be white. But she has African ancestry, and so in the United States, she can legally be enslaved. And, this happens a lot more in New Orleans and Louisiana as a whole, but particularly in New Orleans. So the reason I bring that up is because Sally Miller, this enslaved woman, appears to be white. Now, her owner, Mr. Belmonte, is going to argue that she does have African ancestry, and he was told that she has African ancestry when he purchased her from John Miller, and that's where she gets her last name. So she is working at this cafe, enslaved at this cafe, and one day a woman of German background pops into the cafe, a lady named Madame Ruth. And Madame Ruth, after talking to Sally Miller and visiting with her a little bit and being served by Sally Miller, believes that Sally Miller is not of African ancestry. Sally Miller, Madame Ruth thinks, is really a young German girl named Salome Mueller. And Madame Ruth believes that what really happened, what actually did happen, whatever she believes about the relationship or not, that Salome Mueller's family immigrated from Germany and arrived in New Orleans, and there's a small German community where the German people know each other. And Salome Mueller's family went to work on a sugar plantation as indentured servants. There's not a lot of those still running around, but there are some indentured servants still running around. And from what Madame Ruth had heard, Salome Muller's entire family died of yellow fever. And yellow fever is really, really vicious, has a very high mortality rate. Sorry. And so what Madame Ruth thinks happened is that Salome Muller, her whole family died, but Salome survived. And the person that she originally belonged to, this John Miller, changed her name to Sally Miller, claimed that she had African ancestry, and then sold her because enslaved human beings are incredibly, incredibly valuable. And so that's what Madame Ruth thinks happened, this terrible, terrible miscarriage of justice, this, white child being sold into slavery. And so Madame Ruth gets a couple of other friends and they go and investigate. She brings these other couple of, I think she either brings the couple of friends to the cafe or somehow she gets Mr. Belmonti to agree to, on some kind of made up story, to let Sally Miller go with her for an afternoon. And she shows Sally Miller off to these other friends. And they all think she looks a lot like those Mueller people. And this is, not legal if that's the case. And so they raise money to sue for freedom, like that freedom suit that we talked about with Mum Bet. A slave owner does something that's illegal that would result in the person getting their freedom. So the small German community in New Orleans raises money and they sue to get Sally Miller her freedom. And she, initially Mr. Belmonti is on the lawsuit as well as Mr. Miller. The court records this as Miller versus Belmonti, but Mr. Belmonti drops off of the lawsuit because, hey, he argues that he didn't know that, she was not legally able to be enslaved. And so this lawsuit centers on John Miller versus Sally Miller. And this does get into some really kind of weird and uncomfortable issues with race because the lawyer that they hire does not have any scientific ability to show that Sally Miller is actually Sally Mueller. And he doesn't have any scientific ability to show that she does not have any African ancestry through DNA. That's not a thing yet. DNA kind of pops up mid 1990s, and it doesn't even become widely available probably until like 2005, 2010 is when you really start seeing the 23andMe and all that kind of stuff. So this is not a thing. So, Sally Miller's lawyer is going to have to rely on racist arguments, unfortunately, to try to prove that Sally Miller does not have African ancestry. And John Miller is going to argue through his lawyer that Sally Miller is a quadroon. She is somebody that has, one African American grandparent. She is a quarter African American. And so, she would appear to be Caucasian, but she does have African ancestry, and so she can legally be enslaved. Well, Sally's lawyer is going to argue that she can't have African ancestry. And here's a quote that he uses. And it's pretty racist, but he's trying to procure this person's freedom. And so, it's kind of sketchy. Anyway, Miller's lawyer, Sally Miller's lawyer, is going to say, quote, in court, the quadroon is idle, reckless, and extravagant. So he's playing on, racist ideology about people of African ancestry. Not, actual stuff, but he's trying to argue this stuff. And he says, this woman, though, Salome Mueller, he's used her old name, is industrious, careful, and prudent. And so she has all of these qualities that are supposedly represented by white folks, and sorry, no race has, inherent qualities or anything like that, but he's trying to make racist arguments to get her freedom. Um, and ultimately, very, very cool, her lawyer does sway the court that John Miller, it's on him to prove that Salome Mueller, uh, does have African ancestry and can legally be enslaved. And he's not able to prove that. And so Salome Mueller, whichever, is going to get her freedom. Uh, that's the cool part. The sad part is that she did have 3 children, and she tried through the same kind of argument to get their freedom, but she wasn't successful in that. She had had relationships with enslaved men who definitely did have African ancestry, and so the argument's going to be, unfortunately, that those folks can be legally enslaved, and so she wasn't able to win their freedom. And she is reportedly, to have left Louisiana for California and wound up out there somewhere in the 1840s, I guess with the gold rush. But then historically, we sort of lose track of her. So, we don't know as historians where she is buried or anything like that to, maybe do a exhumation and DNA testing now. What's really cool with this case, though, and one of the things that I really like about this case is I originally ran across this case with that book right there that's in the slide, The Lost German Slave Girl by John Bailey. And Bailey argues in his conclusion, and he says, hey, I don't have any way to prove this, but he argues in his conclusion that he really thinks that Sally Miller was Sally Miller, and that she probably had African ancestry, and that she was not related to this Salome Mueller, whose entire family died of yellow fever, including probably Salome Mueller. But Sally Miller was a young woman who appeared to be Caucasian, who was working at this cafe, enslaved at this cafe. And this German lady comes in and says, hey, I think you're Salome Mueller, and we're going to file a lawsuit to get your freedom. And Sally Miller, probably being very intelligent, said, that sounds cool. Let's do that. And just kind of went along for the ride. And fortunately for her, ultimately was able to get her freedom. And so John Bailey argues that Sally Miller was actually, had African ancestry and was enslaved, but she just happened to be in the right place at the right time to enjoy this lawsuit and get her freedom. And I really like that court case. I think it's kind of cool that, something good happened by accident. So we'll talk at you later.